Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be reading you a little bit of this book that I wrote under my pen name Ivan McWilliams, and it will probably be a while before I get to publish this, so what I'm doing right now is kind of a way to show a little audience my work before it gets published. But before I start reading this first chapter, once the video where I read Chapter 2 comes out, there will be a link to it in the video description. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into this. The Tainted Personality of Joel by Ivan McWilliams, narrated by Ivan McWilliams. Chapter 1. What I did. The thing is, at first, my life was pretty much perfect until I made a stupid mistake that screwed it up. You see, this is a little autobiography I decided to write, and this isn't supposed to be some sort of personal-ass diary where you write a crapload of emotional stuff. The reason I'm writing this whole damn book about myself is so I can show you all the insane things that very unpredictably happened in my life, ever since I decided to sneak into my history teacher's house through a window with a knife in my hand. Anyways, this is why I decided to do what I did. My history teacher was also the mother of my best friend Eugene, and I was so pissed off at her for this really harsh punishment she gave him. I know this sounds gay, but I found him so cool that I had a crush on him, so I was livid as hell about his stupid mom. I was even thinking about taking revenge on her. I didn't just like Eugene as a really good friend, but I also liked him as a boyfriend, even if he wasn't ready to kiss me yet or anything like that. However, here's what was happening on the morning before my revenge. My life was going great, and I was getting into my dad's car. He was about to drive me to school, and I was 15 years old. He was a skinny white man, and he had short black hair. I was in the front seat, and observed that as I was being driven to school, a few buildings were being passed by as we were driving through LA, and we would pass by a few houses once in a while. We were taking a special route to school that hardly anyone knew about, so there was hardly any traffic. Then he pulled up by the front of the school and dropped me off. I walked to the first period of the day, which was history class. I sat down at my science table, which happened to be the same table Eugene sat at. For some reason, his personality has a little bit of stupidity, so he decided to tell a really badly planned out dirty joke in the middle of class, and then his mother marched over to him and humiliated him by scolding him in front of everyone. And then the punishment she gave him was almost unimaginably humiliating, especially since it was in front of the whole class. At the end of the school day, I exited the school and was so pissed at the teacher, Miss Burrell, for making her own son's life hell. I waited for my dad to arrive to pick me up, and I kicked a twig on the ground out of rage. Then his station wagon pulled up, and I climbed into the front seat. He said he got a call from the school about what happened to Eugene, and my dad immediately seemed very scared because the school said the punishment was so extreme that Eugene got kind of injured. The principal, of course, decided to fire Miss Burrell, but I felt like that wasn't enough. I had a very intense desire to take revenge on her. Later that night, I decided how I would get my revenge. I put my pocket knife in my jeans pocket, and I went to the living room where my dad was, and I lied that I was just going on a walk. However, I wasn't thinking of doing anything like killing Miss Burrell, but after I walked out the door, I started angrily sprinting to her house. I knew where she lived because I had already been hanging out at Eugene's house once in a while. A few minutes later, I arrived and peeked into the window of his mom's bedroom. She was sound asleep in her bed. I pushed on the window screen so hard that it fell down. The glass part was already open. I climbed in and towered over her. I stared at her for a few seconds, and was mentally preparing myself to pull out my switchblade. But like I said, I wasn't about to stab her, but I was just going to cut her pretty hair, and hope that in the morning she would be devastated and embarrassed as hell that her beautiful, curly blonde hair was gone. I also hoped she wouldn't know shit about what happened, and she would have the panic attack of her life. The thought of that made me chuckle. After around a minute of hesitating, I brandished my blade, and I knew what I was about to do was really stupid, but I was so pissed off that I didn't care. Then it kind of looked like she was waking up because I noticed that she was starting to move a little bit, so I started panicking, and I flinched and dropped my knife. It landed on her arm and caused a minor scratch, but then I quickly grabbed my switchblade and tried to get away with what I just did by immediately jumping back out the window. I landed face down in the dirt and heard her let out a piercing scream while my feet were still in the air next to the window. 1 second later, my legs touched the ground, and I could taste the dirt that ended up on my teeth. I dragged myself back to my feet and raced back home. I entered the house panting, and then my dad, who was on the couch, asked, "Are you okay, son? Why does your face look kind of dirty?" I quickly tried to think of a lie, and then I said, "Because I was just running for fun and I tripped and my face touched the dirt." What really happened was my entire face had touched the filthy-ass ground when I jumped out the window of my teacher's house. Then, I went to the bathroom and washed the dirt off and brushed my teeth, and I was pleasantly shocked they barely got away with what I did at Eugene's house. The next day at school, I walked to my history class like usual, wondering what it would be like since the teacher was fired. Then, when I was about to enter the classroom, I saw Eugene passing by, and this is kind of hard to explain, but a wave of love passed through me, and the way I would describe this feeling of pleasure is, if this autobiography were a comic book, those really small hearts would be floating above my head. Then I entered the classroom and sat down. The substitute teacher hadn't arrived yet, and he was seemingly running late. Eugene said to me, "Hey Joel, yesterday, my mom told me that someone snuck in through the window of her bedroom last night with a knife and tried to stab her. She couldn't make out who it was because she was just waking up and was very groggy." I didn't want to be thrown to prison for life, so I, of course, wasn't even close to admitting it was me. But I felt so bad that Eugene was probably very scared thanks to the incident with the knife. As I waited for the substitute to arrive, I unzipped my backpack and whipped out an assignment from yesterday and took a good look at a list of historical last names on a paper to pass the time. The directions said to choose a last name for your character and keep your real first name, and then you play some sort of educational game with the kids sitting next to you. I pointed at this one particular last name that Eugene decided to make a dirty joke out of yesterday, and I chuckled. It was the same joke that pissed his mom off and got her fired. I exclaimed, "This is the name that got you in trouble," Eugene complained. "Well, here we go again," I said. "Okay, fine, that's enough being silly about it. By the way, I of course have no idea when I'll mention what pissed Miss Brell off so much about his dirty joke. Definitely not anytime soon. The really obscene thing he said will probably remain a mystery for now." Then, several minutes later, for some strange reason, my gay energy took over. Without thinking much, I started leaning against him while I still had a pen in my hand and was writing something. Apparently, he wanted to be generous, so he didn't even bother to flinch or anything like that, and he just let me cuddle with him. However, I feel like I should have thought twice before getting all romantic. A couple students turned to look at what we were doing, and one boy decided to make his mockery stupid by saying in an incomplete sentence, in this mocking voice, "Gay!" My body temperature started rising, and I tried my best to somehow slow down the surge to prevent myself from blushing, but to no avail. his desk mate teased. Yeah, it looks like someone's got a crush on the same guy who had to drink soap yesterday. Then, several of the kids around those boys started laughing their asses off, and then a few more students started whispering to them, and then they whispered what was going on. Pretty soon, the situation escalated, and then the entire class started laughing their asses off, and that was it. I couldn't stop my face from turning completely red. I couldn't take it anymore, so then I snatched Eugene's plastic water bottle off his desk. He shouted, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Before he could process what was going on, I unscrewed the cap and threw the bottle at the boys who were teasing me like a grenade. It hit one of them on the head, and the ice-cold water streamed down all over him and he started shrieking. The whole room went silent, and I admired my victory as his desk mate gave me the finger. I got even more pissed at him for flipping me off, so I grabbed my own plastic water bottle and tossed it straight at him with the cap unscrewed. It landed on his hand, and that water streamed down his middle finger and splattered all over his shirt and his desk. Then he picked up his own water ball ready to get back at me, but before he could, the substitute entered the room. The bully whispered to his friend, holy shit! How am I supposed to get back at him now?" The sub walked to the front of the room, and his name, Mr. Ramirez, was written on the board. He announced, "Hello, kids, don't even ask about my name because it's already written on this whiteboard." One kid decided to mock that odd introduction by calling him by his first name. He said, "Okay, Mr. Miguel." Mr. Ramirez snapped, "Nope, I don't know who the hell that is." He continued announcing, "Anyway, Miss Burrell handed out those papers for the historical game yesterday, so since you guys were probably interrupted when you were choosing last names," before he could finish his sentence, everyone started chuckling, apparently because they were reminded of how Eugene got punished for telling his dirty joke. Mr. Ramirez said, "Settle down, class. I know about the dirty joke." Then he continued explaining the directions. As he was speaking, Eugene whispered to me, "Look at this new blade I got." He slipped a switchblade out of his pocket and switched it open. The blade looked so shiny that I immediately squinted my eyes, and it almost blinded me. I whispered, "Whoa, why are you pulling that out at school? You know you shouldn't do that." He told me, "Well, guess what? If those two boys mock us again for being gay, or the joke I told, they'll wish they never messed with us." I chuckled. "Well, that's kind of intense, Eugene." Later that day, I was outside and it was lunch break. I had my tray of cafeteria food in my hands, and then I saw Eugene passing by. I waved at him, and then pulled the folded-up list of last names out of my pocket. I unfolded it right in front of his face, and he got surprised and kind of chuckled. Then those two kids who mocked us in history class approached us. One of them teased, well, look who's now laughing at something we teased you about," Eugene scolded. Well, look who's now looking for some more trouble. Piss off or else we'll beat your ass." He balled up his fist and started shaking it. The victim said, "Oh, really? Well, it looks like the victim needs a shower." He pulled a plastic water bottle out of his backpack like what he was about to do in class, but just as he was unscrewing the cap, Eugene charged at him and pulled out his shiny-ass knife. He held it up to the bully's throat, and I noticed a psycho look suddenly appearing in his eyes, and he looked livid as hell. He screamed, "I just told you to fuck off! How about you choose life, not death, before I slice your ass to pieces?" The bully seemed pretty cocky, and he was pretty confident that Eugene wouldn't kill him, so he teased, "Go ahead and kiss your new boyfriend, Joel." Eugene shouted, "You don't think I'm gonna do it, do you?" The bully said, "Hell no, bitch. Now get that knife out of my face before I wrestle it out of your hands and stab your ass." Then I suddenly decided to help Eugene out, so I dropped my food down and lunged at the bully and wrapped him in a bear hug, and he couldn't move an inch. Although I didn't even know what I was talking about, I blurted out, Looks like this punk is now in a submission lock. The bully knew he was now helpless, so he finally started being a pussy, and he pleaded, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry! Please don't hurt me!" Then I noticed the principal coming around the corner, so I quickly let go of him and jumped backwards to make all the blame land on Eugene and avoid getting in trouble. He, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky because he didn't see the principal coming around quickly enough. So the principal saw the bully pretty much being held at knife point, and then he angrily blew his whistle with a crapload of the air in his lungs. He shouted, "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" Eugene opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the principal glared at him and scolded, "How dare you attack Liam, you terrible child! I always knew you were no better than an animal." Eugene started to seem all helpless, and he just stood there stunned for a few moments. Then the principal said, "Your time at LA High has come to an end, young man." Then he asked the bully, "Are you okay, Liam?" "No, sir," said Liam as he pointed a finger at me. "This bitch over here just wrapped his arms around my neck, and I could hardly breathe." I then contradicted him and shouted, "That's not true! I just wrapped your ass in a bear hug, and I didn't even touch your neck!" The principal shouted, "Stay out of this, Joel! I'm calling both you and Eugene's parents, and you boys better expect to never set foot in the school again." Then he escorted us to his office. A few minutes later, we were sitting in a metal folding chair across from the principal. A wooden table was between us. Then he shouted at us, "So you think you can just treat an innocent student like a piece of shit and get away with it, huh?" Eugene protested, "An innocent student? Well, you don't know about all the crap he put us through. He mocked us in the middle of class because he thought we were gay. And then everyone started laughing their asses off." The principal started glaring at Eugene through a narrow squint. Eugene just kept on talking and he said, "And besides, Principal Duncan, how are we treating that kid like a piece of shit when I just pulled that knife on him out of self-defense?" Principal Duncan scolded, "I don't want to hear it! There is no excuse for pulling any kind of weapon on anyone." Eugene just kept on trying to explain himself. He said, "But sir, you don't understand. Liam was actually being homophobic to us in the middle of a freaking classroom in front of a bunch of students, and yet he just wouldn't stop bullying us even after they started laughing their ass." The principal cut him off and shouted, "Homophobic? The kids here already know the guidelines for the etiquette at this school. Do you think it's August or something? That is a terrible excuse for making a young student fear for his life. Now I'm of course calling your father, and like I said, I'm gonna have to expel you boys." Before he finished his sentence, his face suddenly looked very hostile, and he screamed, "So get out!" Eugene said with his voice quivering, "Okay, sir, okay." As we walked out of his office, I saw him pick up the phone attached to the wall about to call our parents. We exited the school through the front entrance, and several minutes later, our parents' cars started pulling up. My dad would usually have a smile on his face when he would pick me up, but this time, he was frowning, and he didn't say a word as he walked up to me, and then we walked back towards the station wagon. However, when Eugene's mom stepped out of her car and approached him, she scolded, "What is wrong with you, Eugene? I hate the fact that I had to get a call from Principal Duncan in the middle of the day when I was working. Now I have to waste my precious time picking you up early when I could have used it to get a crapload of work done." My dad was so disappointed that he just remained silent the whole drive home. He just turned on the radio, and the only sound in the car was the news. 10 minutes later, when we got home, he finally started lecturing me, and he shouted, "Who do you think you are helping Eugene hold a pier at knife point? It's bad enough that you did that to him, but on top of that, you had to throw water at his friends in the classroom like a 5-year-old!" I was surprised and I shouted, "How do you know I also did that?" "Because your principal told me that You thought it was okay to do what you did because that peer was being homophobic. So long story short, he took a look at the security footage that was taken during history class, and that's how he found out about your retaliation with those water bottles. Several seconds went by, and I was stunned and speechless. My dad continued. Anyways, you can forget about video games, TV, and of course going over to Eugene's house anytime soon, cause you are grounded forever. The intensity of his lecture started making me tremble, and then I asked, "How long is forever?" He said, "Until we can find a new school to enroll you in, and most importantly, until I feel like I can trust you again, and who knows when the hell that will happen. Maybe it will last forever. Besides, I know you've been struggling to move on from how Mom died in that hotel fire, so I can see why you would do something so terrible at school, but I feel like I can talk to you about once or twice a week to help you with what you're going through." "Okay, Dad," I agreed. Later that night, we were eating dinner, and there was a knock at the door, followed by a voice shouting, "This is the police!" I assumed that the police were here because of the incident that happened earlier at school, but I was kind of confused because the principal had already expelled me and called my dad, and I was just a minor. My dad opened the door, and there stood two officers. One of them said, "Hello, are you Matthew Martell?" "Yes, sir. Is there a problem here?" "I'm afraid so. Does your son Joel Martell live here?" "Of course he does. I suppose you're here because of that incident at school today." "That's correct, sir, but there's an additional problem. According to some of our records, he allegedly snuck into his history teacher's house through a window a few nights ago, and then pulled a knife. He climbed right back out just as she was waking up. Then my father gave me a livid look, the fire and rage boiling in his eyes. I was scared to death now. He asked in this disturbingly calm voice, "Which teacher?" The cop said, "His history teacher, Claire Burrell." My father turned to face me and he screamed, "That's the mom of your best friend, son! Who do you think you are doing something so evil?" The cop said, "Calm down, sir. I'm arresting him right now, anyway." Then he approached me and ordered, "Stand up." I stood up from the dining table chair. He ordered again, "Put your hands behind your back." He handcuffed me, and as I was being escorted to the police cruiser, I turned around and nosed the look on my dad's face, which was on fire with rage, and then he screamed, "God damn you, you nasty little boy!" and pointed an arthritic index finger at me. The cop started saying, "You have the right to remain silent," but without thinking I interrupted, "I don't want to hear your damn Miranda rights." Then I was thrown to the back of the cruiser, and the two officers hopped into the front. They turned the key, and I started hearing the engine rumbling. And right before we drove away, I looked out the dirty-ass window one last time at my pissed-off dad standing outside the door. His face was blood-red with anger, and I'm not gonna lie, it kind of looked like he was fuming with rage, and steam was coming out of his nose. I was really disappointed that I was in custody, but I still kind of felt like I deserved it. I was constantly hearing staticky shit coming from the radio, and the two officers in the front talking. My mood was so screwed up that I decided to stay silent the whole drive. We arrived at the police station about half an hour later, and then they walked me down a few hallways. Then they threw me into a pretty filthy cell. They removed my handcuffs, and one of them told me, "We'll be back in the morning for your mugshot and interrogation, young man." Then they stepped out of the cell and slammed the door and locked it. I kicked off my shoes and laid down on the rough, low-quality mattress. Then I just decided to let my mind wander. I thought about my partly eaten garlic bread on my plate next to my pasta as it was being escorted out of the house. After that, my brain started flipping through a flashback of the terrible thing I did to Miss Burrell. I started seeing the terrified look on her face as she was waking up. Then I saw myself getting startled and dropping the switchblade onto her bare arm. The dripping blood trickles down her arm and onto the blankets and pillows from the minor gash. The bright red fluid makes the darkness glow a little bit. A little bit of that blood splatters onto my white shirt, and when I run back home, it dries, so my dad probably thinks it's just a stain from everyday activities. Then, almost immediately after that flashback subsided, I began to feel guilty, and for some reason I felt really awful, and I felt like my heart and conscience was now all covered in that innocent lady's blood. Then, some terrible shit suddenly dawned on me. I had probably shown dozens of people just how dangerous I was, just by fulfilling my desire to give Eugene some justice by doing what I did to his mother, and also by helping him hold that bully at knife point. What I felt the most remorseful about was the fact that I knew very well that you don't do those things to a woman, but I decided to do one of those things anyway, just 'cause I was very pissed off. Several minutes later, I finally passed out thanks to all the misery from that despair. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of a cop's fist hammering on the door. He shouted, "Are you awake?" I shouted back, "Yes, sir." The door swung open and he said, "Okay, let's have a little discussion about what you did to your history teacher." "Come with me, young man." I stood up and put my kicks back on. The guard escorted me out of the room and down the hallway into the interrogation room. He told me to sit down in this wooden chair at a desk, and he and his assistant sat across from me. He looked me in the eye for a second, and I already knew what they wanted to discuss, so I said, "Look, I'm so sorry about what I did to Miss Burrell, but..." The officer interrupted. "How about you don't waste your breath on me and save your apologies for her? Besides, why did you pull that knife on her anyway?" "Because I was getting back at her for what she did to my best friend, and I just thought I could get away with it as long as I did something harmless like cutting her hair." "Well, that's a terrible excuse, but if you were just gonna cut her hair, why does she have that gash on her arm?" "Because I accidentally dropped my knife on her arm because she started waking up, and then I flinched." "Did she look at you when you dropped it?" "No, sir. I think she was too delirious." "Did she scream when her arm got cut?" "Of course she did." "Well, guess what, young man?" "What?" "For now, you're gonna stay detained in this police station, and you're probably gonna end up in juvenile detention pretty soon. You, of course, will have to show up in juvenile court, and the authorities will discuss how you're gonna do your time." Then, some kind of awful, unexpected dread started rising in me, as though I was experiencing some OCD anxiety. I just realized that I screwed up years of my future life, since I would now have to spend them locked up. Anyway, the detectives asked me a few more questions, and then they escorted me to another room where my mugshot was taken. I ended up having to spend the rest of the day in custody, and later that night, my father drove by to pick me up from the police station. However, that didn't ease my despair at all, since I already knew I would have to appear in juvenile court pretty soon. Just like the day Eugene and I got expelled from school, my dad was stone-faced the entire ride home, and not a word came out of his mouth. I knew he was very pissed at me, and he probably found what I did very disturbing, so he didn't even bother to try and break the silence.